And now, live from the Ring of Fire, Mike Papantonio.
The Food and Drug Administration has been asleep at the wheel for the last decade, thanks in part to George Bush's decision to pack that agency with his industry-friendly allies. That's along with packing the U.S. Supreme Court with his industry-friendly allies. As a result, we've seen hundreds of products recalled. I mean, we've seen inspectors and companies fail to do their jobs because that's kind of it. I mean, that's kind of the where we are right now into this process. And now we have a U.S. Supreme Court that's kind of like the last part of all that. Let a company like Johnson & Johnson create a product like a DePuy hip implant that is extremely dangerous, causes all kinds of physical problems. And then let the Supreme Court decide that it's okay for Johnson & Johnson to do that. You got to have – everything has to fit together. You have to have Congress that is asleep. You have to have a president and Congress that pack the FDA and regulatory agencies with their industry-friendly hacks. And then you have to have a U.S. Supreme Court. But that's the end of it. You see, once you have the Supreme Court all lined up, then everything's okay. Joining me now to discuss that latest long line of medical device recalls and what it means for not just this case. What does it mean for democracy? Consumer advocate Ben Gordon. Ben, are you there?
I'm here, Pat.
Ben, you know, the story that you're going to tell us is really not just about hips. It's not about this horrible product that's causing people so much problem. It's about the fact that even if you win, even if you show that Johnson & Johnson did all these horrible things, that they hid and they covered up and they caused people all kinds of physical injury, then the Wall Street and the drug companies, well, they know they've got a Supreme Court that's going to give them things like the mincing decision that they did last year. But, you know, you're a specialist you are a specialist, a consumer advocate. Well, what's your reaction to that?
Well, that's exactly right, Pap. The leadership that our government has failed to show has put us in a situation where a company like Johnson & Johnson, as well as others, can put out hundreds of thousands of these different products protected by Congress, protected on Capitol Hill because they claim that the devices are substantially similar to other devices when, in fact, there's no clinical data, no testing, no safety on human beings to show that these products are even safe. So we've got a situation with these metal-on-metal implants, for example.
Let's talk about DePuy. That's a case that you're kind of looking at, that you're handling right now, the DePuy hip implant. This is a perfect example of what happens when the FDA drops the ball, and then we know what the dysfunctional five on the Supreme Court are going to do with it.
Almost 100,000 of these devices got put into human beings without any long-term testing. That is the bottom line that we've known. Scientists have known since at least the 1970s that these metal-on-metal implants that were experimental, that hadn't been properly tested, were not proven to be safe to be put in human beings, and yet a company like J&J can get away with putting 93,000 of them in human beings under a 510K process without any clinical data to back up safety.
This is just a small part of the story we're telling today. But this is the ASR. Okay, and so this is a story where, again, you had a packed FDA that George Bush packed so completely that I don't even think if Obama had spent every day these last couple of years trying to correct it, that he could really correct it. Because what they've done is they've put in place scientists, lawyers, regulators, all in place there at the FDA, and they're working for industry. I mean, really, there's no other way to put it. They are completely working for industry. Here you have a product that the metal ions from this product in the bloodstream can affect the heart, the nervous system, the thyroid gland. Tell us what happened here.
That's exactly right. We're just finding out how far-reaching these systemic problems may be because of these metal-on-metal implants. You know, we only really know the tip of the iceberg, but the fact is that, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, if you look broader than just the hip implants, maybe as many as 500,000 or more, are being exposed to these cobalt and chromium toxins in their body that are distributing throughout the body. They're being excreted. They're coming out in the blood. They're going to the brain. They're going to the heart. They're going to the lungs. They're going to the liver. We don't know. There have been no long-term testing, and yet what DePuy did and what Johnson & Johnson did is they paid consultants who are part of this overall corporate cover-up, millions of dollars to put these devices in people all over the world without first testing study to say that they were safe, sustainable.
But what about the FDA? Again, my point here, this is the failure of democracy. I mean, look, we can't go to the drugstore and buy a product that the FDA has said is safe because we can't trust the FDA. I mean, the FDA. What did the FDA do in this? Didn't they have like over 2 years worth of hundreds of complaints about this product? And
the FDA signed off on a 510K process here without even requiring the first testing, the first safety study by Johnson & Johnson.
Okay, now that's unbelievable. That's incredible. This is something that goes into the human body. It's a hip implant, and you're saying the FDA did not require Johnson & Johnson to do any human testing. Is that correct?
It's unbelievable, but that's exactly the case.
Okay, so what of course, you've been a consumer advocate in courtrooms all over the country for a lot of years. You've seen the FDA dysfunctional from time to time, but even with this Obama administration, has anything really gotten any better?
Well, it's just gotten worse. It's hard to believe they've got this kind of failure of leadership. You thought with the new people that we saw Obama administration bring in that there'd be a change, but the fact is that nothing's happened, and they're just asleep at the wheel.
Okay, so at this point, what a person has this thing called what is it, an ASR?
ASR hip implants. They 33,000 or so in the United States, 60,000 more throughout the world have been put in. And we know from the corporate files that we're going through right now in the last 30 days, as we're getting this discovery from J&J, that they knew at least in late 2007, if not early 2008, that these things were failing at least twice the rate of any other implant ever put on the market.
Okay, when you say fail, what does that mean to the human body that has this in it? I mean, what does that mean?
It means, at the bottom line, Pap, it means that the metal is disintegrating in these patients' hips and distributing fragments of particulate, cobalt, and chromium throughout their body.
And at this point, we know, again, the story to me is, this is a terrible story. The story you're telling about the ASR failure is horrible. The hip implant is horrible. But isn't really the story, how do we ever allow capitalism to work in the United States when we have no regulations, when we have the very agency who knew, according to you, they knew for 2 years that there had been hundreds of complaints, hundreds of failures, hundreds of problems, and they did nothing because of the same old problem. That is, people leaving the FDA go to work for industry, people leaving industry go to work for the FDA, and there really is no oversight. Isn't that really the threat to democracy?
Well, you know how far it goes, in fact, we don't even have, only because of this problem, as a knee-jerk reaction to this problem, have we started, because of pressure put on the government by people like you, have we started them to put out a registry of the people who have these things in their bodies. Australia's had it for over a decade. The Northern European countries have had these registries to show, so we have epidemiologic data, so we can see what's happening in these patient populations. The United States hasn't even had that in place.
The drug industry fought that, didn't they? They didn't want a registry because if you have a registry that tells the story of how many people are being hurt, then that's not good for industry.
They fought it, and they got away with it in this country because of the teabaggers and the other people out there who are saying that you can't have government interference, you can't have government regulation, because they're all getting paid millions of dollars as consultants. And yet in countries in Europe and throughout the rest of the world, like Australia, there have been these registries set up for over a decade.
And we know this much. When it gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, the dysfunctional five are going to, every single time, line up for the drug industry.
It's truly astounding and scary.
Every single time. Ben Gordon, thanks for joining me, my friend.
Thanks, Pat.